So Oliver Mantell is here, as Tom said, from the Audience Agency. If you work for an organisation that's funded regularly by the Arts Council, you'll be really familiar with the Audience Agency and in particular with Audience Finder. But I think what we're trying to prove today is that Audience Finder and the work that Audience Agency do has really broad application and could be useful to all of us. So I'm going to hand over to Oliver, who's going to tell you about some of the really interesting work that they've been doing. And we're going to have a little focus on Wordsworth Grasmere in particular as an example. So Oliver, you're very welcome. Do you come on?
Thank you very much. And Tom, would you be able to power up the slide engine if you've got that? It's handy there somewhere in the, there you are. Smashing. And I'll ask Tom to move slides, but probably not for a little bit. I'll just chat for to start with. So yes, hi, thanks very much for inviting me along. At the Audience Agency, we work with arts and cultural organisations about understanding audiences in general, and we've been doing lots of work around that during COVID and the pandemic in particular. And probably the question that I've been asked most often in relation to that is what are audiences going to do next? You know, what kind of, when are they going to come back? How are they feeling? What's the kind of, you know, where are audiences at the moment? I should say the other question I got asked most often was, why on earth did you grow a beard in lockdown? But you know, we're past that now, so it's all good. So in terms of the kind of where are audiences at, I can give you an answer because we've been doing a population survey where we've asked a representative sample across the whole country a whole load of things about the cultural engagement. It's called the Cultural Participation Monitor, and there's loads more details on our website if you're enthused by what I say in the next few minutes. But broadly speaking, when we said to people, if there's something you wanted to see, how would you know, which statement of these feels most like where you're at in terms of attending? Are you happy to go? Would you think about it, but you've got reservations? Would you not be comfortable for various reasons, you know, until things improve a lot, until COVID disappears, or indeed, I'm just not interested? Broadly speaking, it's about a third split between, yes, I'm totally happy to go now, I'd think about it, I'm possibly, you know, might go, or all the other categories that said really essentially, you know, not yet. I have to say the most optimistic thirds are slightly smaller, so they're more like 30%, but generally speaking, it's about a third each. So that's, you know, a start, we know roughly speaking where people are at, but we can say a bit more about who those thirds are. So in particular, the people who are most likely to be happy to attend in the short term will tend to be younger. They tend to be based in urban areas. They tend to be previous arts attenders. So the people who are more engaged are more inclined to come back. But particularly, they're more likely to have children. So I don't know what it is about having children at home that makes you want to leave the house, but it's definitely there as an effect. And in fact, I have a bit of a clue what's driving that. It's probably that, you know, people recognise the need to go out and do things with children. They know they're taking on a lot of kind of ambient risk by, you know, children being at school and things. So we've got these, you know, these three different groups. We know a little bit about how they're different. You know, if those are the people who are more likely to attend, then it's the kind of flip side of that profile. You know, people who are less likely to attend tend to be older, more rural, not have children, not be previously engaged. But that only gets us so far. And I guess the reason why people have been saying to us in this, you know, with such urgency, you know, what on earth do you know about audiences right now? What can we do? Is because it's felt like a bit of an unnerving blank slate moment, where all the research that people have been doing for years have, you know, it's just stopped, you know, it feels like it stopped being immediately relevant and usable. But in fact, there is a way of linking all the previous research and analysis to what we know about audiences now. Yeah, we've got a secret weapon, which is Audience Finder, as mentioned, but also a tool within Audience Finder, a way of understanding the population called Audience Spectrum. And so I'll be talking a little bit about how that helps us to bridge some of these sort of gaps in what we know about people. And also then a little bit more about what else people have been telling us. So what Audience Finder is essentially, and it's freely available to anyone to use if you want to, not just Arts Council or Arts Council clients. It collects either ticketing, transactional information from about 500 different organisations, or survey information from, again, several hundred organisations, gathers it all together into one place. It then shares those results back with people to say, here are your results, but here's a bit of context. Here's people, here's other organisations that are like yours by where they are or by their particular art form, whatever. And here's the national picture. So it kind of contextualises the results. But also then we get this big pool of data sort of in the middle from everybody that we can then do other analysis on. And the thing we use at the heart of that is this segmentation model, audience spectrum. So what that does is it takes the whole population and they're split out into 10 different groups of people based on the types of cultural activities and how much of them people typically do. We got that initially from a big national survey called the Taking Part Survey, and that describes people's behaviour in lots of detail. And so we can say there's tend to be people who are really highly engaged. They tend to do lots of these contemporary kind of activities, or highly engaged with more traditional things, or moderately engaged in these types of things, and so on. Once we have those groups, we can look at who they are, where they are, what their demographics are, and use that to match it back onto the whole population. And so once we've got that picture, we can see, where these different groups of people are, we can use that as a way of stitching together all sorts of different bits of information into one place. So for example, we can use all the ticketing information for Audience Finder, we can use all the survey information for Audience Finder, but we can map it all, we can show where these people are. We've got lots of other information about who they are and where they live and various other stuff. And thank you very much, Kate, that's very useful shortcut there. But also we can then link it to new information we get as we find it. So for example, with this cultural participation monitor, where we've been looking at people's attitudes now, we can also then profile responses to that and say, okay, we said that some people are really happy to engage, some people aren't, but we can say a little bit about which group are which. Any slides? Yes, first slide, please. That is beautifully timed. Thank you, Monique. I've tried to keep the graphs to a minimum because I appreciate not everyone has the same kind of graph lust that I have. But this first one, what we've got here, and I'm not going to explain each of the segments in huge detail, but you've got the list of the segments along the bottom. There's more information about all the profiles of them on our website as linked. So I wasn't sure what that is. Anyway, sorry, I'll keep going. But you've got all these segments along the bottom. You've got the dark colour bits of the bar, the people who are happy to attend. Then the total at the top is the people who are happy and also the people who say they would consider it. So basically everyone who's kind of in play within each of these segments. Now there's a bit of a margin of error around all of these, but this is the broad picture will be this kind of shape. So Tom, if you can click on again, I'm just going to zoom in just on 5 of these rather than look at the whole picture. So starting at the far left, we have metroculturals who are super high engaged, most keen, go to most things, happy to spend most, go to lots of cutting edge, best of the best kind of arts and culture. As you can see, they're really keen to get back out there doing it. 3/4 of them are in play. It's all great sunny news, except that they all live in London. Well, I say most of them live in London, and lots live in other big cities. But it's worth noting that that's where the kind of outliers in terms of enthusiasm for cultural engagement is currently lurking. However, on the other end of the scale, we've got this blue group, one of the lower engaged groups, called Facebook families, which tends to be lower income families, particularly families, possibly living in council accommodation. They aren't super engaged in certainly subsidised arts and culture. They might be more interested in sort of participatory or outdoors activity. Cost is a real barrier in lots of cases, so you need to think about that. But also, things which assume a lot of existing cultural knowledge might be a little bit of a barrier as well, might be a bit off-putting. They're potentially quite happy to attend. You know, they're second on the list in terms of being happy to attend. But there is this thing about they're not massively motivated necessarily in terms of lots of things that maybe all of us do. So there's a bit of a tension there. And we'll see that playing out in a sec. Then we've got 3 segments left. And the left-hand 2, I'm going to deal with together and then come to home and heritage last. So community land culture buffs are the absolute kind of bedrock core audience of lots of arts and cultural organisations across the country, particularly they're really big across the north. And I'm based in Sheffield and do lots of work across the north, so it's very much we recognise these people all over the place where we do work, and they are highly enthusiastic about arts and culture. They're a bit older. They, as the name suggests, they tend to live in commuter areas, and indeed they're culture buffs. They're really into their culture. Their tastes skew a little bit traditional, but they've got money. They're prepared to spend it. They're really enthusiastic. But what we're seeing here is they're kind of average in terms of how keen they are to go back out and attend, which, given how much pressure there is towards them wanting to attend because they love it and they can and whatever else, and there are families in this group, but they're not sort of necessarily tied down by the children so much. They tend to be older families, but they're not as high as they could be because they tend to be older, rural, etc. and sort of things we've already mentioned. And dormitory dependables are kind of the flip side of that same equation, where they sort of dormitory towns as opposed to proper sort of way out into house of the country type territory. They have families, but they tend to be a little bit younger, and more of them have families, but they're slightly less enthusiastic about going to arts and cultural events unless it's something very, very particular that grabs their attention. The result is there's reason for them to attend more, there's reason to attend less. It nets off, they're about the same as community land culture buffs. But these 2 groups, community land culture buffs, dormitory dependables, hugely important in your local area. It's a really big chunk of your local audience, as I will show you in a sec. And then finally, home and heritage, which is, if you like, the bad news. So they're moderately engaged. That's why they're in yellow. They are older on average than almost all the other segments. They're more interested in things like participatory activity, or particularly, hence the name, heritage. So we sometimes think of them as a kind of your classic National Trust member. Not when people going around National Trust with their kids so much, but they're kind of the slightly older National Trust member. And there are quite a lot of them in Cumbria, and they're quite well spread. And they're the most reluctant to go out and attend. Again, it's they're older, they're rural, they don't have children at home, generally speaking. So what we're seeing is this battle going on between these kind of key drivers of why people would attend, and it's playing out through these groups. But because we've got these groups, we can then use that to link all this other information we have to say, well, who was coming in the first place, which audiences were traveling furthest, who lives where, and we can bring all that to bear through these segments and link it to this new survey information. So specifically, let's look at where they all are. If Tom would click us on to the first of a little run of maps. So this also might help give you a bit of a flavour of who some of these groups are, because obviously you'll know the local area much better than I do. Community land culture buffs, there are a bunch of them around, particularly that little pocket west of Kendal, but generally speaking, there's a good smattering of them. And obviously that's quite key, but potentially, and this might be something for the conversation later, you might expect a bunch of these to be commuting sort of out of Cumbria. So they're living, because it's a lovely place to live, and then commuting elsewhere, potentially. Could you click me on? So dormitory dependables. So this is the kind of, if you like, this is the mother lode of audiences in Cumbria. It's the biggest single segment. They're really broadly spread. They're available everywhere to some extent. I say everywhere, there's a little bit of an exception where Kendal has been a bit of a blank spot so far. So if we click on, oh yes, my memory didn't serve me very well. That's still true for this one, which is home and heritage. But again, this group quite broadly spread across the less built up areas. However, Kendal, zooming back in on them with the next click, trips and treats. So just to show that really, our maps aren't showing that Kendal is not occupied. So this group tends to be kind of younger families, slightly more built up areas, moderately interested, but very driven by family activity in terms of engagement. And then finally, so just sort of do a quick segment tour, one more click, and we have Facebook families. So this is the group I said, families, but typically lower income, good proportion in council housing and so forth. You can see that over Cleetham and Cleetham Moor, around Whitehaven, etc. So, out towards the edges. And I think actually, if I'd zoomed out just slightly, there's a pocket in Barrow as well. So where's the north of the county? Sorry, I just cropped in around Grasmere, which is probably a bit wrong of me, but I just thought, just get a nice sort of, because we're talking about words of trust in a sec. It's essentially the software I was using, it doesn't let me fully zoom in and out. So this is as far out as I could zoom, so I went for a little bit. I'm sorry. What I can do afterwards actually is grab some maps that cover the rest and then share those if that would be useful. So you can see that with this situation, you've got maybe, thinking about Facebook families, you've got a group that are potentially prepared to attend, but not strongly driven by lots of particularly where culture where there's barriers in terms of price or prior engagement, knowledge and things. And if you were someone like the Wordsworth Trust, okay, I might come back to these requests actually. I think there's a way, there might be a way of addressing this more thoroughly. So if you were Wordsworth Grasmere, say, you'd think, well, there's a reasonable chunk of these groups, but are we going to get them to come across from Whitehaven, Workington, etc., or is that a bit of a stretch? Are they going to travel? Is it a children's activity? Is it low, are there really low barriers to in terms of cost, etc.? How's that going to work? So you can combine the mapping and the other information to kind of start to make these calculations and adjustments. So yes, the maps are freely available online as in Audience Finder. You literally just need to go into Audience Finder and then there's a mapping section you can scroll around. You can also click on I need a given place and it'll tell you all the numbers behind them. And can we click on one more? Talking of the Wordsworth Trust, and I'm going to be very brief because I know Steph's going to say more about them in a sec. But it's again just showing how you pull these bits of information together. We can see okay, that's a bigger question. I can answer it. I was trying to avoid getting too technical on it, but I can briefly. People are allocated by postcode, but how we get there is much more complicated. So so it's looking at the Wordsworth Trust. You can see that most visitors are from those really highly engaged groups. Two of those groups that I flagged earlier, Community Land Culture Trust, Staunch Expendables, is getting on for half the total audience. We've seen there's loads of them locally, but clearly you've got people travelling in because you've got a little pocket of metroculturals there on the end, even though there's none in the local population. So that gives you a sense of when we're thinking about what are the population feeling, really the question here might be, what are these two very particular groups of people thinking? And we can look into those in more detail. But of course, if we click on once more, we have got, so this is showing who did come during the kind of late summer, early autumn period last year, because they were collecting information during that time, and we can see it pushes even more extremely towards those groups. And it's quite interesting what's happening here, because we've seen that metroculturals, there are kind of 0% across the Northwest. There's even less, if that makes any sense, in the northern half of the Northwest. And yet it's a really quite big audience. And what we saw from other research we did at the time was that during this COVID period, what seems to be happening is that people would travel locally or they travel a long way. They weren't doing the kind of middle distance journeys. So metroculturals are coming up from London visiting, etc. Whereas other people who might be closer but not not right on the doorstep, maybe weren't traveling as much. So you end up with this kind of this skew. And of course, there's a tension going on between, are you super interested in culture and therefore it's enough of a motivation to go, but then all these other sort of pools, demographics and other things that are kind of encouraging people not to. So there's this kind of little tension going on between those two factors. And what we're seeing is that, generally speaking, cultural enthusiasm is kind of winning through. But it's, W2 is Wordsworth Trust, and those are the years. That was the kind of the comparator years, the 2 years of data before COVID. Beg your pardon. So I'll pause there. Sorry, I'm trying really hard to to answer, but also not get distracted by the questions. It's a funny balance. Just to say though, so we can see that picture playing out in terms of the segments, and hopefully that's clear how we can draw previous attendance, during COVID attendance, during COVID attitudes, previous information, all together in one place. And then for each of these, some of the questions you've asked about, so what motivates this group, or where are they, or whatever, we have all that other information we can bring to bear on it. All of that's freely available via our website. So I just want to talk very briefly about a few other things about what people have said, and then have maybe more chance. Well, Steph can say her bit and then a couple of questions. So broadly speaking, there's a big skew towards people moving to work from home, of course. Broadly speaking, of people working, it's been about a third working from home all the time, a third some of the time, a third not. But when we look at anyone who has worked from home and said, do you expect to keep working from home? 3 months ahead, yes, loads of people, 37% all the time, over half saying some of the time. But even once people look beyond COVID, it looks like that pattern's going to stay. So again, 30%, so getting on for a third of anyone who's worked from home so far, which is obviously most people, or anyway, they think they'll work from home all the time. Another 54% some of the time, and only 16% of people who have worked from home saying they won't at all. So what that looks like is that there'll be a big shift towards people working from home. And the reason that matters is that we've seen essentially that people tend to, if they work, they'll tend to work in one of two places. They'll tend to attend the arts in one or two places, where they live or where they work. Now, if those two become the same place, you've got a kind of concentration of audiences away from places where people tend to work but not live, towards places where people tend to live and not work. That's likely to benefit you. So it's likely to mean that in the medium term, those big pockets of commuter land culture buffs who we thought might be commuting elsewhere are going to spend more of their time locally, and therefore they're more likely to attend locally as well. And in fact, we asked people, do you expect to be working more locally, attending the arts more locally in the future? And we asked them for a range of specific things, and basically for everything, people were saying, yes, we expect to stay more local after COVID, even once it's gone, than we did beforehand. That's particularly pronounced for stuff that is more available locally, and things like outdoor parks, gardens, etc. But in general, it's higher. We also asked people, what do you expect to be doing more or less of once things are back to, quotes, normal? And yeah, sorry, Kate. And people were talking about going outdoors to parks and gardens and kind of outdoor attractions of various sorts. They were more likely to do more of those. Net 12% of people more were saying they'll do more than less. Film, it's the other direction. People are expecting to do less film, 8% on balance, saying less. Live events only very slightly down. But generally speaking, you're likely to see a skew towards more local engagement, more outdoors activity, and so more of those types that you're seeing right on your doorstep. And that's me. So sorry, that's a little bit longer.
Okay, well, we'll try and come to some questions in a minute, because people have got lots of them, Oliver. Thank you. And I appreciate that there's a massive amount to say. What we'll try and do is signpost people to where you can find this information, because it isn't difficult to find once you know where. So let's go to Steph. Okay, Oliver. Steph's going to tell us about how it works, how Audience Finder works at Wordsworth Grasmere, and what they're doing with the data that they're collecting. So Steph, 5 minutes max, okay?
Okay, I'll do what I can. For those of you that I haven't met, which is most of you, I think, I'm Steph Biest and I'm the head of visitor experience at, for the Wordsworth Trust at Wordsworth Grasmere. And for those of you that might not be aware, we've been through a huge programme of redevelopment, and we have relaunched as the visitor attraction side of our organisation as Wordsworth Grasmere this over the last year. So for us, the data that we collect through Audience Finder is absolutely vital to see how the work that we've done is going down with the audiences that we're attracting. But if I go back just slightly, we've been working with the Audience Finder since 2012, is that right, Kate? And that was before my time. We've been collecting, so we've collected a wealth of data. The way that we collect that data is either via survey. So we will ask our visitors on site, face to face, ask them lots of questions that the Audience Finder helps us compile. Often there are also questions that are asked elsewhere across the rest of the country in other similar organisations, so that when we look at that data, we can compare it nationally as well as locally, as well as against our past information as well. So we can collect that data through surveys, but what we can also do is that if we haven't got the capacity to collect surveys like we did last summer, we can just take postcodes, and using the Audience Finder, they can do something called Postcode Analysis. So they enter all of the postcodes from all of our visitors that have visited us into their database, and it spins out lots of reports and information of all of these segments that you've seen, what the visitors, who they're like, what their sort of socioeconomic status is, and we can see whether or not we're achieving what we'd hoped to achieve. So that's what we've done, that mix. Now this year, because of COVID, we've gone for a different approach, and we're using email surveys because we have moved to an online ticketing system. So we take those emails, so that's an easy way for us to do that. What we've seen is by using that technique rather than a face-to-face survey, is that the number of surveys that we've collected has absolutely surged. But what we have also seen is that there is a slightly more negative skew on the data that we collect from those people that answer the surveys post-visit. So it's almost as if they've had time to think about it. They might be miffed by something that's happened in their day, and that might influence, there's other external factors that might influence that. So to balance that, what we also do is we use a QR code survey as well. So there's posters across the site. Our staff also have the QR code on their lanyards, and so if they're having a conversation with the visitor says, well, I'd just like to share this feedback, we say, well, please do scan this, and you can do it using a mobile device. Just to say that what we have found is that what you've seen from the data that Oliver shared is that not all of our visitors are of a mobile smartphone user type. So there are people that we have found this year that we do need that alternative version, say on an iPad, for us to give to a visitor and for them to fill out themselves. So that's that. How I use the data, it's been absolutely vital this year to see how the new developments that we've done on site have landed with the visitors that have made it to site. We also can see whether the marketing plan that we've put together, and we're saying we really want to attract more than those traditional segments. We know that we've absolutely exhausted our supply of some of those visitor segments, and they're travelling all the way from London, and they are, to come and visit us. We really want to attract more of those Facebook families, more of those people that we know are in that local population. And that's where the segmentation, the data that you get, the information behind those segments can really help, because it can tell you what papers papers that they tend to read, what websites they tend to use, the search engines they tend to, social media they tend to look at, and things like that. And so that can really help you from when you're pulling together your marketing plan. And then you can take a look at the data you're then getting back and see whether or not it's worked. For us at the moment, we're still attracting our traditional audience even more so, but I think that's because they're incredibly engaged. You can also break right into how much time they're spending on site, and that you get that through the survey data, forgive me, not the postcode analysis, because there'll be specific questions that they ask, but we can look at how long they're spending on site. So I know, for instance, that our dwell time at Wordsworth Grasmere has doubled since the last comparator, which was in 2017, 2018. And that's brilliant. That's exactly what we wanted to achieve, was to keep people on site and engage with us longer. We also know that people are having a better time when they're here with us. We also know that people think our pricing is okay. It's never perfect, is it? You can't please everybody, but it's okay. And so there's just lots of questions, and you can tailor those questions as well that you ask to suit the needs of the audiences that you work with. How am I doing for time, Kate?
If you could wrap up very soon, that would give us a chance for some questions.
Absolutely fine. So yeah, I could go on. I find it fascinating. I absolutely love looking at this data. What I also like to do is see how we're doing against the Northwest, against other organisations within the Northwest, and then against other organisations within the wider. And what's been really difficult to gauge is, as Oliver was saying, was whether people were going to come back and whether they were going to make that effort to come back. And I think that's where this sentient data that you can get through, it helps you when you're trying to pull together your plans for reopening, or plans to expand, or plans for programs and things like that, to see how it works. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Steph. And okay, we could listen for much, much longer. As usual, we kind of try and give people a flavour of this sort of work, and people can follow it up afterwards. But we will follow up now with some quick fire questions. And I am going to start by saying, Oliver, this is something that is done by all of the national portfolio organisations up and down the country. In other words, every regularly funded Arts Council organisation. How is it useful to everybody, though, to anybody running any cultural organisation?
That's a quick question, is it?
My quick question, yes.
So it's used in different ways. So it partly gives us a picture of who's engaging overall with particular art forms, you know, which art forms are engaged with most and less, and so forth. We can also start to see particular trends which are happening for particular groups. For example, something I've spotted in the data, which we're going to be publishing at some point quite soon, is that it looks like certain people are stopping going to Panto, which has various implications in terms of that being quite important for the funding of lots of theatres. But more generally, it can be used for strategy, strategic planning, thinking about if you want to get a broader audience, specifically who are those broader audience, and really focusing on a particular set of needs that all go together, as opposed to trying to generically broaden the audience. So it allows people to be a bit more focused. So yeah, so it's that, and it also can help with working together with people. So, you know, consortiums of organisations like your own, obviously you've got a common language to talk about your audiences and how that works. York Theatre Royal, when they shut their refurb and started working with the Railway Museum to do joint productions there while they were shut, used Audience Spectrum as the centre of their planning, because they were both already using it. They all both had years of data. So it's that type of stuff. Great.
The fact is that this information is accessible to everybody on that audience agency, Audience Finder website. So I really would encourage people to look. It's free to explore and really easy to navigate. If anybody else has got a question now, please do pop your hand up. There have been lots in the chat.
I'll try and answer some others in the chat as well, if that's helpful.
Hands up if you've got a question. Tom, I can't read the chat and speak at the same time. Are there any that we can take from the chat?
Anne, has yours been answered by Oliver in chat? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else then? No, I think everybody's a bit dumbfounded. Clearly, there was such a lot of information to take in. I would just encourage people to go to the website and have a good look. Well, John, you had a question there from up front. Do you want to quickly ask that?
I have to find the unmute button. Hello, everybody. Thanks, Oliver. That was really interesting. We're always floundering around trying to find that information, making bids for funding, like where our audience is, how do we prove it? I'm always fascinated to see that Cumbria, generally, including the north and the south of Cumbria, not just the middle honeypot tourist bit, tends to have a sort of lower than normal take up of artistic events, and it's gauged by how many events you attend in a year. Is it 3 or 4 or something or other? How many did you attend? It can be a gallery, a performance, a show. On that basis, for some reason, Eden can't qualify as well for grants because people seem to have more provision of arts in Eden because there's a higher uptake. So as a part of Cumbria, Eden district seems to have an higher uptake. Now, is that to do with geography? Is it to do with spend? Is it to do with transport? It's okay knowing who comes and where they come from and knowing what they think about what you've done when they get there. But I appreciate Cumbria is a really complex place. So,
and that's quite a complex question. Go ahead and try and answer.
The focus of the Wordsworth Trust, for example, is on something fairly specific.
Yeah.
So as an arts centre that has puppet shows, potentially a new museum, music concerts, food, dub and grub for younger people, our demographic is huge. And that would be interesting to know how we would gather that information for someone like us.
Oliver.
Okay, yes, as you say, a complex question. The data sets that tend to be used for funding, I think, is particularly the Active Lives survey. So that will just be based on whether, you know, the proportion of people in particular local authorities that say they do particular things. Obviously, you know, there are caveats around that. The funding side of it isn't defined by audience finder data. That doesn't feed into kind of those decisions. Indeed, we don't share information on an individual level with anyone unless we've got permission. We only share aggregate information. It's trickier from sort of multi-purpose venues. If you do collect ticketing information, it is free to put that in, and you can art form code it and then see those different strands pulled out separately, which might be useful. That might be a bit of a reach depending on, you know, systems you use, etc. But I'm really conscious that yes, Cumbria was a lot more complicated than just particular bits of it or a very quick overview of the whole thing, which, you know, I appreciate there's always a risk of doing that.
Oliver, I'm going to have to stop you there.
No,
like Michelle Hussain here, but we're going to have to move on. John, pop your question in chat direct to Oliver, and let's see if Oliver can answer that.
It's a really good session, and it's fantastic to have Oliver here because it's reaching out to us in our ruralness, and that's great.
And do please email me, any of you. My email will be available.
Yeah, pop it in the chat. The main thing is you can find out more about your very specific area and your very specific art form on the Audience Finder website. So please do look. Tom, apologies, humble apologies for running over to you.
Thanks all, that was really fascinating. Right, let's move on now to find out what Playlist for Life is all about. And I'm delighted to welcome Mark Costello, who is going to talk to us about that. So Mark, if you'd like to come off mute, say hello, and I'll get your slides up.
Yeah, hello everybody. I know a few people, seen some familiar faces, so hello to them and hi to the new guys. And we'll just start with the slides and carry on from there, Tom. Yep, so hello, my name is Mark Costello and I represent an organisation called Playlist for Life. And it's quite a simple idea, really. It's about connecting through music, and it's about the power of music, really, and personalised music that can help people with dementia and their families. So the project itself, it's about raising awareness of the power of music and encouraging people to harness that power and to create personalised playlists. And it's something that we can all do. It's a fun thing. You can use your investigative skills to be able to identify their music. But where does it all come from? And that's where the next slide goes into. So people of a certain age will remember Magnus Magnusson, and on the left-hand side at the top there is Mamie Magnusson, who was the wife and the mother of Sally Magnusson, whose picture's in the pictures on the right. Mamie had dementia. Sally was a carer, and like a lot of people with dementia, at certain periods during the day, if she had to go to bed, get washed, go for appointments, take medication, etc., she used to become anxious, frustrated, and sometimes angry. What Sally discovered, like many people, was that when music was introduced into the scenario, some favourite songs that had been sung, in family moments, that Mamie became calm and was able to more readily involve herself in those tasks. And this inspired Sally then to set up the charity, which is called Playlist for Life, after looking into some of the scientific research that had taken place at Stanford University and Stirling University about the potential that music has on various different aspects of the brain, not just memory, but also cognitive and motor stimuluses as well. So if we just go on to the next slide. So the charity was formed, Playlist for Life, and as I said at the beginning, it's quite a simple charity. It's about raising awareness of the power of music, and it's about getting the message out to lots of different community organisations, arts organisations, libraries, anywhere really, that where the public attend, and where some of those public people might have relations that themselves have got dementia. So quick statistic there, 850,000 people currently living with dementia, and 2/3 of them live at home or with family carers. So our idea is raising awareness. It's about developing community networks where people can get information, and it's also about training on some of the the intricacies of putting playlists together, because it's not always as simple as just favourite songs. But we'll move on to the next slide there. So a colleague of mine went into a dementia cafe and introduced this lady just to some of the booklets and resources that we had. And if you just press play, Tom, then this was what happened next.
Summertime and the living is easy. The fish are jumping and the cotton is high. Your daddy's rich and your mama's good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry, don't you cry. Summertime and the living is easy. The fish jumping, 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 and the cotton is high. Your daddy's rich and your mama's good looking, good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry, don't you cry. And lush, I mean crush, this is the song. Yay!
Okay, so to go to the next one. This was a lady who's got dementia who was just introduced to the booklet, and that sparked her own memories of singing that particular song, and so she just sung it completely unaccompanied and spontaneously. And that's one of the benefits, I guess, of people living with dementia and being introduced to music, is that it can help people connect and reunite, recall memories or abilities, just as we've seen, restore a sense of self, help manage moods, and in medical terms, reduce the needs for drugs. And there's been some partnerships with hospitals, particularly in Scotland, where music is being used on prescription now as an alternative to drugs. So next slide, Tom. As I said earlier, when we're sort of producing playlists and the resources that we have, that you'll see in a moment, it's not just about favourite songs, but it's about uncovering music attached to memories. And we might not always know what those are, because obviously, you know, if you're doing something for your parents, they had a life before you were born. and they might have particular memories associated with their own childhood. So it's about using investigative skills, and we call that music detective skills. But many of our memories are formed between the age of 10 and 30 years old. We have a lot of inheritance music that we get from our own parents. And then there might be other identity tracks as well, things that make up part of our personality or where we're from, or our allegiances. So it's about putting all those things together and creating playlists that have real meaning. Next slide, Tom. So our role really is, as I say, awareness raising, and then giving resources to organisations to set up what we call help points, which I'll mention in a moment. But we have things like these conversation starters. We have personalised musical journals that people can work through. And then we have other resources like 100 Years of Music, where you can be delving into 100 songs from each year over a 100-year period. Next slide, Tom. And this is just an example of the conversation starter. And again, the thing about identifying or associating memories with different times of your life. So that could be that 10 to 30 year period. Could be party tunes, hobbies and interests, special moments and milestones, songs from your childhood. And it's not always about pop music. It could be TV adverts. It could be favourite children's television shows. I'm sure most people here remember Rainbow, Magpie, Blue Peter, and the songs and music associated with those things. Next one, Tom. We've also got a lot of translated resources as well, so it's not just in English. Currently there's 10 different translated sets of resources. And on the website there's a good new case study actually about Southeast Asian family, and again about how music in their lives has been helped to with a parent of dementia as well. So if we just go on to the next one. So making a playlist, this is what we encourage people to do, and it's all about those detective skills of asking family and friends, making long lists, listening together, and but also remembering that some music can cause an adverse effect as well. So being quite sensitive at times to ensure that there aren't any red flag songs that might agitate or upset a person. So keeping things in particular moods. Often people will produce different playlists for different times of the day. Some that are more calming, some that are more upbeat, you know, so that there are different emotions emitted. Next one, Tom. And of course, the benefits for family is just that experience of being involved with another person, and you know, fun activity of listening to music together, reconnecting, and helping to relieve stress and improve well-being as well. So I think it's a win-win all around. And if we go to the next slide, which is about the help point. So this is a little bit, this is kind of the meat and veg, I suppose, about why I'm here. One of my roles is to sign up help points. And that's a place that's open to the public where people can come and get information. So the playlist website itself has a lot of information on there, and it has contact numbers. So if someone comes across the idea of creating a playlist and the power of music, then they can contact a telephone help point, who can then direct them to a local help point where information is stored. A help point itself can just be a place where posters are displayed or where information is kept. But other help points doing other things. So for instance, libraries will put information in memory bags, and they will also do sessions with groups. The resources lend themselves to actually involving yourself in creating playlists and going through different aspects of your life, just as the conversation starter showed. So, you know, we encourage people to take the resources and share them, but if they want to do more with them as a result of having them, then that's brilliant. And you know, that would be one of the great things about some of the help points that we've already set up and started. And I think the last slide just gives my email address there for anybody who wants to contact me and would like to become a Playlist for Life help point, to take on the resources and to get involved in spreading the message. Thanks very much.
Mark, thank you for that. That was really inspirational stuff. And I think, you know, it's a really great charity that is growing gently all the time. And it would be lovely to see it expand more in Cumbria. So thank you so much for your time this morning, Mark. Right, I'm conscious of time, speaking of time, and we're just going to change gear and we're going to fly off to Florence Martin, that marvellous former iron ore mine in Egremont, which is now a beautiful arts centre, which is run by Anne Waggetnott. Anne's going to give us a whistle-stop tour of some of the stuff coming up very soon. So Anne, I'm going to get your presentation up and then away you go.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tom. I know I've got about 2.5 minutes, haven't I? So the Arts Centre is a community arts hub and contemporary arts hub in West Cumbria, just outside Egremont. We're open Wednesday to Sunday, 11 till 4, and we have such a wide selection of cracking Saturday workshops coming up that I thought it was worth just letting you know a little bit about them. And for the record, we are definitely interested in becoming a Playlist for Life centre, and we will be in touch with you, Mark, about that. So thanks ever so much. Are my slides on the way? I can't quite remember which one I was talking about first. But this Saturday, i.e. tomorrow, anyway, we have a few tickets left for a really wonderful family performance, the Encyclopedia of the Human, which is a really interactive musical workshop, including a songwriting workshop as well. And that's appropriate for families and individuals. So tickets for that are available now, and just pop onto our website, florenceartscentre.com for more information. Any sign of the slides, Tom?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get them, Anne. It's because they've been done slightly differently to what I normally do. So carry on. Sorry about this.
No problem. I'll share JPEGs of the slides on the Facebook group after this, and maybe we could circulate them as well. That would be really, really helpful. Next Saturday, off the top of my head, we've got a really cool workshop from Signal Film and Media, and part of the Elements Photo Call exhibition and programme of events, and local artist Zoe Forster will be coming to make photo sculptures with us, which is where you can transfer photos onto things like seashells and create these amazing marine landscapes. So again, that's free, it's drop-in. Visit the Florence website for a little bit more information on that. That would be wonderful. Coming up after that, we have a fantastic exhibition by ArtCrit North Cumbria, which is the first time this group has shown together, and it's a group of really quite cutting-edge contemporary artists from across North Cumbria. So that's a very, very broad exhibition with things like sculpture, ceramics, film, digital, as well as painting and printmaking. And we've got 2 workshops, one on the 20th of November and one on the 11th of December, with some fantastic stuff. Would you like me just to share these in the Facebook group, Tom?
Yes, please.
Yes, I'll do that. Thank you. I know we've kind of run out of time now. But yeah, have a look at the Florence website. All the information's on there. Please spread the word, bring friends and family, particularly little ones. It's free, it's drop-in, and we're very much trying to attract the Facebook families groups as well as the metro or the rural culturals, whatever we're called out here. So thank you very much, and that was a really useful session.
And I'm sorry I couldn't get the slides. It's because they came through to me slightly differently and I couldn't share my screen without. Anyway, I'll make my excuses later after this call, and we will get them out to you as and when we can. Apologies for that. It's 10:31. Thank you to everybody for your time this morning. Our Audience Finder, I think we're going to try and look at Audience Finder in a future session as well, Kate. Is that right? With Oliver?
We'll work with Oliver to create a separate longer session, I think, where we can really drill down in more detail. Is that right, Oliver? Yeah.
Yes, if people would like that, we'd be very happy to do some extra analysis and share some more stuff.
I think we really
invite all comers who are interested in that. But yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry it was a bit long, but yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody, for this morning. Next week, by the way, we're going to hear from R.L. Wilson about a project he's doing in the west coast of Cumbria. We're going to hear about a book from Caroline Moyer, which is about darkness and disorder at a Lake District university. And also Steve Swallow from the Castlegate Gallery in Cockermouth is going to tell us about a lovely exhibition that they've got on at the moment. I think it's Sheila Fell is the artist in residence there, so that should be really interesting as well. The book, by the way, is called Brock and Spectre, and we've got a little film to show you next week as well. Thank you to Oliver, thank you to Mark, thank you to Anne, and thank you to Steph for this morning. Great to see everybody. Stay dry, stay warm. See you next time.